Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. Red Bull are raising the possibility of some financial trickery still at play behind the scenes here in Formula 1, with many top Red Bull staff being signed away to other organisations over the last few months. Helmut Marko says there's no way that Red Bull could match the salaries those teams are offering, and raises the question as to whether the cost cap is potentially in jeopardy on some of those other teams, as it was for Red Bull way back in 2021. Is this potential near enough cheating accusation legit? Very much into your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I greatly appreciate it. Let's begin with Daniel Ricciardo there, because he will not be in Austin this year competing, driving for RB, because they dropped him after the Singapore Grand Prix, and apparently he's not going to be there in any capacity at all with the team Red Bull. That's what they've had to say. So it's tough, and especially tough because there are a couple of things that they were meant to do for Daniel, because we know that he rather likes it out there. For example, the city of Austin were going to honour Daniel Ricciardo by giving him the keys to the city, kind of like a, I don't know, tradition thing that they do sometimes. Not really sure what's going on there, but anyway, that's not going to happen because he's not going to be there after being relieved of his driving duties by VCARB after the last race. So yeah, they were going to present him with the ceremonial keys to Austin because of what he's done for that Grand Prix and the entertaining character that he's been over the years, but he's not going to be there because he's not driving, which is unfortunate. And there's also this, so his brand Enchanté, like a clothing brand, whatever, is going to have, well, is planning to have a pop-up in Austin 18th, 19th of October, on the couple of days before the Grand Prix on the Sunday. And this was the announcement about it. Enchanté, Austin, Texas, and these other details presented by Cash App, of course. Cash App, the company that supports VCARB, Visa, Cash App, Racing Bulls. We think that's what it stands for anyway, although they won't tell you that it stands for anything for some reason. But Cash App largely came on board with VCARB, RB, whatever, because of Daniel Ricciardo, and were seemingly planning, and may well still plan, to support Daniel Ricciardo's kind of pop-up store in Austin over the Grand Prix weekends, but he's not going to be there anymore. So it's all kind of strange and confusing. Couple of other things on the driver market. Felipe Drugovich, we talk about Drugovich not that often, to be honest, unfortunately for him, especially because he has had a couple of opportunities in IndyCar that maybe he still could go to. But ideally for Drugo, he wants the opportunity in Formula 1. Would he be a good driver in F1? Probably. I mean, he won Formula 2 a couple of years ago. Think he could be rather adaptable, but unfortunately for him, Lance Stroll is in the seat, and therefore there's not really an alternative. So their test driver, their reserve driver, Felipe Drugovich, will be in the AMR24 during FP1 of the Mexico Grand Prix. I think he's going to be replacing Alonso, so, you know, Stroll is going to be in the other car during the FP1 session. But yeah, he is working a lot back at the factory on developing the cars, simulator work, this type of stuff, but is not probably ever at this rate going to get the opportunity that he desires in Formula 1. But then again, with other rookies doing a good job, you can certainly argue that Drugovich could do a stellar job where he might potentially go, and of course Aston would make sense, but unfortunately there's no seat available there for some time, and in 2026, 7, whatever, maybe Max Verstappen comes knocking on the door, and we're going to talk a bit more about that in the coming minutes. Even Albon reckons that because Colapinto was doing so well, proving that rookies can do well, but in addition to, and you know, rookies are kind of back in fashion right now in Formula 1, which has obviously always been the case, but it kind of took a bit of a different trajectory in the team's decisions over the last couple of years. I was quite critical actually of when Haas decided to put Hülkenberg in the car. That's turned out to be a stellar decision and proved me massively wrong, but still, my theory of putting young talent in the cars does seem to be coming more back into fashion nowadays, and we're seeing it with Colapinto, and Albon saying, well, Ricciardo found himself in a tough spot because Colapinto was potentially available, is available for a team like RB. If they wanted to put Lawson in the Red Bull, they'd have a seat available there for a guy like Colapinto potentially, or just, you know, other options are available too, but Colapinto doing well has resulted in Red Bull deciding on some level that Lawson needs the drive, or at least needs to see how he gets on. So we'll see how that goes. And it's funny because people raise the question to Colapinto, like, did you expect to be this good? And he was like, yeah, I know what I can do. I was expecting to be fast. No surprises from my side. So he's got great PR right now. I'm sure that's going to continue when they get to Brazil. Whether he gets a drive for next year is a question, because the Williams team is locked and loaded. Lando Norris and Max Verstappen are in the championship fight. fight, as should be no real surprise. They are the most common podium pairs on the grid this season. Norris is in a few of these, including with Hamilton, including with Charles Leclerc, of course, who have shared a fair few podiums this season, as we can tell. Even Perez and Max, surprisingly, have only shared 4 podiums, but I guess that does make a fair bit of sense. Speaking of that battle, though, Lando did have something quite interesting to say on the battle with Max back at the Austrian Grand Prix. When we look back at this season, that may go down as one of the most critical Grand Prix weekends because, of course, George Russell took a famous win after these two guys collided, but it was the first time we'd really seen them come to blows on track. Lando in the first stint couldn't quite get the pace, but in the second stint was closing up on Max big time, went for the pass on 3 or 4 occasions, and on a couple of occasions Max was arguably over the line in his defence, and then Lando decided, okay, I'm not going to be able to go down the inside because Max is going to move to cover that line last minute, so I'm going to try on the outside. Then, of course, Max famously squeezed him to the outside of the track. They collided, obviously damage to both cars. Lando's car, well, he was out of the Grand Prix. He had to pit and call it a day. Max was able to get a new tyre on, get back in the Grand Prix, and despite taking a penalty, still picked up, I think, P5, P6 for about 10 points on the board. So Lando lost out big time on the day. And honestly, when this happens, it was my opinion that, well, the title is over because Lando was on paper, given the strength of the McLaren at that time coming into form, the guy that could potentially challenge Max. And after this race, Max actually extended his championship lead quite considerably despite not winning the Grand Prix. So if anyone won the day, it was Max. Both of them were arguably over the line in some capacity. I think Max's defence was too far. I think Lando's dive bombs on some occasion, like this one for example, were arguably too far. But it was an entertaining battle and a critical one over the course of the season. But actually Lando gave some thoughts on this and says that in hindsight he feels like he won the battle. And it's quite interesting to think about the headspace which requires this type of perspective. But I do get it from Lando's point of view. Max is not an easy guy to beat, and on some level you have to show him that you are capable and willing to race him hard and wheel to wheel and fight hard. Now, of course, technically Lando lost the day. Max scored the points, Lando scored 0, and in the grand scheme of things, if Norris either didn't go for the overtake or eventually did get the overtake done by probably going down the inside again, which is probably what he should have tried one additional time, then he would have been in a much stronger position than he currently is in the championship fight that they are currently battling over. But at the end of the day, Lando says, I feel like I probably won the battle of taking the fight to him, although I didn't win who came out on top that day. So I guess Lando's point is, gotta show Max that I'm capable and willing to fight him hard, and Lando reckons that on that count he actually won the battle. I guess it's kind of similar to what happened at Silverstone 2021. Obviously, Verstappen was kind of doing whatever he wanted on the track. When it came down to racing out the drivers, pushing hard, this kind of like, move out the way or we crash type mentality that Verstappen certainly had in the early part of his career and certainly in 2021 as well. And then in Silverstone, when Hamilton, the crash they had at Copse, obviously it was a big incident and still a controversial moment to this day. But on some level, I think that was Hamilton saying, look, I'm not just going to yield. Like, Hamilton put himself at Copse that day in the position of, okay, look, Max, are you going to get out of the way or are we going to crash? What are we going to do? And I think that was a critical moment as well during the season because it showed Max that, okay, this guy's not always going to get out of the way and give me the right of way all the time. And it was the same thing said about Senna back in the day, that Senna was kind of like, look, you either get out of the way or we crash. That's how it's going to be. And then mentally he has the edge. So I think the point that Norris is kind of getting across is that he feels like he won some sort of a mental war that day by actually taking it to Max. Whether you really buy that or not is a question, because I think Lando even thinking this kind of shows that he has Verstappen on a bit of a pedestal, and maybe that's fair and justified, but maybe it shouldn't be if you're in a championship fight with a rival. There are some interesting thoughts on it. This is funny as well. You guys remember when Lando dominated the Dutch Grand Prix in Zandvoort in Verstappen's backyard? He won the Grand Prix and then he said, simply lovely, eh? Or whatever, right? Simply lovely, huh? And this caused a bit of drama. I don't know if Max massively cared, but there were people suggesting, even Daniel Ricciardo, right, said that, yeah, Max won't be happy about that. And, Lando going into his home race and smoking the field, beating Max by 20 plus seconds. I think it was the biggest margin of of the season at the time, and then saying, yeah, simply lovely, Max's kind of catchphrase, was definitely a bit controversial. And it turns out that Max now has the trademark to simply lovely, at least from like a clothing merchandising perspective. Of course, he can't trademark the two words to be used. It's not like Lando can't say it again or he's going to get sued. And there is actually talk here that apparently this trademark was filed back in May and only recently approved. So it's not necessarily like Max's response to Lando in this case, but it was nonetheless kind of interesting. But let's dive into a couple more pieces of drama on the Red Bull side. It was 2 years ago today that Max Verstappen clinched the 2022 Drivers' World Championship in some style, of course, in Suzuka. But fast forward to today, it's a rather different story within that camp. And Helmut Marko is going as far as to say whether rivals are actually following the rules when it comes down to poaching their Red Bull staff. We know that there have been many individuals from Red Bull over the last few years that have left. The likes of Dan Fellows has gone to Aston Martin. These are from the engineering side. Rob Marshall has seemingly been a big loss as well. He went to McLaren, and of course, you know, their trajectory has been mega. So there is a real feeling that Rob Marshall has been a key reason why that McLaren team has taken some steps. They got him from Red Bull a couple of years ago now. In recent times, Adrian Newey. In more recent times, Jonathan Wheatley. Will Courtenay, among others that have left that team because they are simply offered more money elsewhere. Now, this is a known thing. It's not brand new. And I guess Mercedes maybe didn't suffer from this so much when they were in a dominant period. They did on some level, and there was definitely a time where Red Bull were going to Mercedes and saying, on Mercedes staff, and saying, look, you're part of a great team that's dominating. Don't you want to try a new project? You've won for the last 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years in a row, whatever. Like, how about you come and work for us and we'll pay you more money for the privilege? And that's what many of the Mercedes staff did. They got poached away. But to be fair, at the time, Mercedes were within their rights to say, all right, Red Bull are offering you this, we can match it, right? Because the budget cap didn't exist. Nowadays, that's not so much a thing. And if someone comes along to a Red Bull staff member and says, hey, we're going to double your salary, come and work for us, it's pretty difficult to turn that type of offer down in Formula One. So, and Red Bull can't necessarily match those offers because the budget cap is a thing. And Marko says, of course, if you win for 3 years in a row, so dominant in 2023, your team members are coveted by other teams. That is inherent to Formula One. What surprises me are the amounts that are offered. We always struggle with the budget limit. There are restrictions on the financial side. There are many exemptions to the $135 million budget cap, such as, the top 3 earners, among many other things that are exempt. So the actual real number spent is far higher than that. And there is a theory that, well, they're only spending $135 million on paper, but the reality is they're putting a lot of the $400 million that the top teams used to spend into, let's say, a hypercar project or into some sort of other project where there might be some insight they can glean that they can bring back to Formula One, but they are fundamentally limited in not exactly how many employees they can have in the organization, but it's, the reality is that the top earning members of the employee staff list, they can be earning in the millions, and yet the majority of engineers are earning a pretty modest salary, certainly from a UK perspective, I would say, because they have financial limits to adhere to and they want to hire many a staff. So that's the restrictions that Red Bull kind of are against. And of course, Red Bull have pushed up against it and too far in the 2021 season, catering and all that. Other teams have to do it as well. But of course, the question always is, how tricky is the accounting getting? Our team's doing X and they're spending X, but they're really spending Y, but the accountants are putting it in this way. And I'm sure this trickery is happening everywhere. But Marko's implication seems to be that the other teams are spending more on certain staff members than it feels plausible that they should be able to. But still, these employees are offered double and more than what we give, and they hold a higher position than with us. It just means we can't hold on to everybody, even after a period of 17 years in the case of Newey. In the case of Jonathan Wheatley, we're talking about 19 years. They were part of this team, they were part of the success, and then it hurts when they go. But it's about finances and greater career opportunities. If you can't offer the same, then it's no different, and that's the natural progression of things. But yeah, Marko says he's surprised that these other teams can afford the salaries they are paying. But then again, if you're a team that have, 800 staff rather than 1,200, for example, which I think is kind of the number of employees in the top teams tend to have, then then, you know, if a team has fewer employees, they would be able to afford more money, technically. So it's not necessarily guaranteed there's anything dodgy happening here, but it's interesting, right? Because this is like the meme about Red Bull, is that like when Ferrari lose, they say, oh, well, you know, we're still Ferrari, Forza Ferrari, we're still the best team, you know, it's everything sunshine and rainbows, we're going to win next time. When Mercedes lose, it's like, oh, I'm so sorry to the fans and all this. And then when Red Bull lose, it's like the other team's cheating. And, you know, sometimes you get this kind of implication. It's kind of funny, really. And even Marco goes on to say about Matishit's passing and how that impacted Newey's decision. In fact, he was quite, like, clear on this, really. I mean, Marco often is. But Dietrich Mateschitz passed away now a couple of years ago, and he says he was an autocrat. Decisions were made quickly. He was a charismatic entrepreneur with a certain vision and someone who was prepared to take risks. Now, everything within the organisation is being organised differently, far more bureaucratically, one could argue, making it impossible to find a personality like Mateschitz. He therefore cannot be replaced by just one person. I think that also played a role in Newey's choice, the choice for a new adventure. So, as always tends to be the case of Marco, pretty honest, pretty straightforward. But yeah, do you guys think that any of these other organisations are fiddling the numbers so they can afford to hire some of these staff away? Certainly for a team like Aston Martin, right? Because Aston are saying that they are offering crazy numbers, but the reality is for a guy like Newey going over there, he will be part of their highest paid employees. So that money doesn't matter. They can pay Newey 100 million, 50 million, you know, $1 billion a year, like whatever. It doesn't matter because that's not in the cost cap. It's the engineers that are kind of just down from him where these numbers start to play a part. Dan Fallows, for example, who they brought in a couple of years ago. Those are the numbers that are more relevant rather than this kind of Newey situation. But intrigued to your thoughts, as ever, in the comment section below. Max, by the way, didn't rule out the possibility of staying on at Red Bull, says anything is possible. It's very easy to change teams, but I don't want my career to be marked by that. I don't want to be a part of 4 or 5 different teams. I want to feel at home. Changing teams is not my thing and is not something I'm concerned with at this stage of my career. So, of course, ideally, it's all sunshine and rainbows and he stays. That is, after all, the path of least resistance, but then again, he doesn't rule out the possibility of moving elsewhere. It's absolutely possible, given that other teams are getting increasingly competitive. And I thought this is just interesting to see as well. If Max wins the championship, as he is favoured to do, he'd be the first champion to have his teammate finish 8th or worse in the standings since Schumacher, and then even Prost further back than that. We're talking, you know, 30 years ago since that has happened. Pretty funny that F1 guy Dan gives absolutely no faith, and fair enough really, but it's funny that Perez can make it back because, you know, what if Red Bull bring a big upgrade and all of a sudden Max is winning again and Perez is performing better and actually climbs up the standings, which is possible, right? It's not like Perez is doomed to be 8th, but the feeling in the community that is like, yeah, he's doomed to be 8th. And of course, it's not the greatest look. But very much intrigued to your thoughts as ever on all of this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.